This is both a personal account and a shared one of my uncle and aunt, cousins and my mum. My uncle and aunt and cousins used to live in a house in Indiana which was dubbed the Red House. This house was my first experience dealing with the paranormal, but certainly not the last. My uncle and family moved into this house back in the early 1990s. It was a large two-story shingle-style house, corner lot, that was painted red with a creepy basement. Most of it was unfinished with dirt floors and rockstone walls. It had a detached garage and secret room, which I'll get to that later. Our first visit to my family's new house was for Christmas in 1991. We were going to drive up from Florida and spend the week of Christmas with my family. Before our visit, I remember speaking with my cousin, CJ. He was the middle child of three, one older sister and one younger brother. Before going up there, he would tell me that I was going to see ghosts when I came to visit. I laughed it off and told him that he was crazy, as at the time I was 100% sure that I didn't believe in ghosts. He would go on to tell me, though, that he often would see numerous ghosts in his house, predominantly upstairs where his room was located. He said that only one of the ghosts would ever step foot into his room. The others would remain in the hallway and other areas of the house. Again, I laughed at his claims and told him that I would only believe it if I see it. When we arrived for Christmas week, I was surprised how large this house was. It was easily the largest house that I had ever stayed at, and all I could think about was playing hide and seek or manhunt inside the house with my cousins. I was staying with my cousin who told me about the ghost in his room, as he had bunk beds. My parents stayed downstairs in a spare bedroom. As I walked upstairs to my cousin's room, I remember being in awe of how long this hallway was. But oddly enough, there were only 3 doors in that long hallway. The first door on the left was the bathroom. The next door on the right was my girl cousin's, Nicole's room. And the final door at the very end of the hallway was CJ's room. His room was massive. It looked like a mini ballroom, in fact. As you walked straight ahead, there was his bunk bed, and a large window behind the bed. He had his TV and video game system set up to the right, and numerous toys and Hot Wheels racetracks to the left. There was also a small crawl space door along the left side wall. The first night, my cousin kept telling me everything that he'd seen in his room and throughout the house. It did spook me out, but I was still very skeptical of his story. One thing that I did notice, though, was that CJ had very dark circles under his eyes. He said that it was because he couldn't sleep very well in the house, and would often stay up most nights trying to sleep. On that first night, I listened to his stories and we went to sleep, and nothing out of the ordinary occurred. But that would change the very next day. On my second day at the house, after coming inside from playing outside, CJ and I went upstairs to watch a movie and play with some toys. We set up his Hulk Hogan tent in the middle of the room and pretended it was a stadium as we played with the wrestling figures. We had set up some spy tech toys around the room, one toy being a motion sensor that you would set at the door, and if it opened it would beep. We set it up because my cousin Nicole would often barge in whenever or would mess with our toy setup, so that toy would alert us if she entered the room. Shortly after we were playing with the action figures in the tent started shaking lightly. I noticed it at first, but it wasn't too alarming. Not more than a minute later, it started shaking rapidly though. I automatically assumed it was Nicole and looked out the door but couldn't see her. By the time I stuck my head back into the tent, the shaking stopped. CJ was frozen still, looking at the unzipped window of the tent at nothing. Seconds later, it started shaking again. I jumped out of the tent and witnessed it shake for a quick second before it just stopped again. I blamed CJ for somehow doing this and trying to scare me. I then thought it could have been Nicole, but as I opened his bedroom door, the Spytech toy sensor sounded off. That proved to me that no one else other than CJ and myself were in that room at the time. Nicole was actually laying on her bed, watching TV too. Even though that scared me, I still wasn't convinced that a ghost could have done it. I told my parents about it at dinner and they kind of laughed it off. My uncle chimed in and said, "Did CJ's imagination get to you as well?" CJ had apparently told his parents about the various experiences he had in the house, but they did not entertain the possibility of it being a ghost. They just said that it was his imagination. That night, I slept on the bottom bunk and CJ slept on the top. The events that night will never leave my memory. As I started dozing off, CJ reached down the backside of the bunk and got my attention. He told me to look down the hall. The bunk bed was perfectly positioned where, depending on which side you slept on, you could look right down the long upstairs hallway. Where I was laying, all I had to do was turn my head and I could get that vantage point. As I looked down the hall, I saw a very slender and tall man. He had on a toboggan and a long coat. I could distinctly make out his face, and it appeared to be covered in soot or a dusty powder. He was walking very slowly towards our room, but I couldn't see anything under his knees. Like his legs stopped at the knee. It scared the shit out of me, but he just disappeared right before my eyes, before getting to the room, which was only a few seconds. I was so frightened that I couldn't move. I just turned my head and buried it into my pillow. I recall shaking from fear when, a few minutes later, I was overcome by an ice-cold sensation coming from the side of my body that faced the door. I slowly turned around and I saw a woman, clear as day. She had tattered clothing and was holding a cat. She was literally inches from me. She was also musky, like she had on stale perfume, but it was a really light smell. This may sound cheesy, but she resembled the Fratelli mum from the Goonies, body type-wise. I couldn't see her face. I couldn't even scream for my parents. I again turned around and got deep under my sheets with the pillow over my head, and I stayed like that for most of the night. As soon as I got up in the morning, I ran downstairs and told my mum. This time, my mum didn't shrug it off like before. Instead, she said that everything will be fine and some things just can't be explained. A few days later was Christmas. After we opened our presents, we went outside to ride bikes and rollerblade. My mum went upstairs to take a shower and she was alone in the house. As she was in the shower, she heard the door open and footsteps getting closer to the shower. She assumed that it was my stepdad, but it wasn't, as he was outside with us. She spoke out to him, but did not receive a response. As she pulled back the shower curtain, she noticed the open door and was quickly hit in the face with a cold burst of air. It actually knocked her back a few steps, but she didn't fall. Her towel and clothes then fell off the bathroom countertop onto the ground. After taking a shower, she walked outside and asked my stepdad if he had entered the bathroom at any time, and obviously he said that he hadn't. She told me years after this visit, when I was late in my teens. She also told me that the house had creeped her out after our first night there. She felt like she was being watched, and also felt a breath on her neck while walking alone down the hallway. We left a few days after Christmas. I felt really terrible that CJ had to continue living in that house and be tormented like he was. But it wasn't soon after that activity picked up, and my uncle and aunt started having their own experiences, which ultimately led to them selling the house and moving a few blocks away. I want to share some of the paranormal events that they encountered. These are the experiences they had and are not in any particular order, simply accounts that I recall them telling me. They had an old German shepherd named Yankee. He had bad hip problems and was an indoor-outdoor dog. He loved staying in their detached garage and would hide in there during storms. One night, something spooked him so bad that he jumped out the small window located in the garage that was almost 6 feet off the ground. And they found him pouring at the back door. They once went on vacation, and when they got back, they found their huge 500-gallon fish tank busted open and the fish all dead. This tank had very thick glass, and there were no signs of anything falling and busting it open. My youngest cousin, Joe, was at the top of the stairs, and Nicole was at the bottom one time, and they were playing with a slinky. All of a sudden, Nicole said it appeared like Joe was pushed from behind as his body slingshotted forward, and he fell down the stairs, breaking his clavicle. She didn't see anyone push him though, just described what it looked like. Before they moved out of the house, they decided to further explore the crawl space in CJ's room. They thought the crawl space didn't lead anywhere, but that wasn't the case. The crawl space contained bags of rat poison that appeared to be stored in there for a long period of time. After removing all the bags, they noticed that the little room was in fact a crawl space. They crawled in there and wiggled through the tight space for about 8 feet until they found a hidden room at the end of the crawl space. My uncle said the room appeared like a time capsule. It had inches of dust and everything was covered in cobwebs. The air was stagnant and there was an old desk. Boxes of old worn shoes and newspapers from the 1930s and 40s littered throughout the room. They were surprised that they had lived in this house for a few years and never even knew this room existed. Their landlord never mentioned it and was surprised himself when they mentioned they found it. The house was dubbed the Red House because it was painted red. The first year that my family lived in that house, their landlord had hired painters to paint the exterior of the house yellow. Within a few months, though, the red bled right through the exterior. Supposedly, this wasn't the first time someone attempted to paint the house a different color too, but after each attempt, the pale red color would return. The final straw which caused my family to break their lease and move out early was on the night of CJ's first Little League baseball game of the season. CJ and my uncle were already at the ball fields. My aunt got Nicole and Joe in the car, which was parked in the detached garage that was directly behind the house. The driveway of the garage faced the side street. My aunt went through the house and turned off all the lights in the house, except for a lamp in the living room, kitchen light, and the exterior lights. It was already dusk by this time. As they pulled out of the garage driveway and drove around to the front side of the house, my aunt looked up at the house and noticed every single light in the house was turned on. It stopped her in her tracks. As she continued to stare at the house, she noticed the curtains in CJ's room open and a dark shadowy silhouette of a person in the window. My aunt drove to the ball fields that night and told my uncle that it was definitely time to move. And a short time later, they did. Numerous neighbors knew that the house was haunted and would often tell my uncle and aunt. My cousins would also hear it at school as the local kids all knew about the house's history. One of the neighbors told my uncle that numerous people died in that house, ranging from murders to suicides, and the house had been inhabited throughout its history by some very shady and malevolent people. My family never took the time to confirm any of these stories. Once they moved, they wanted nothing else to do with that house. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. If you would like more scary stories too, you can click on the card at the top right of your screen or on one of the annotations on your screen right now. As always guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. And also, if you would like content early and completely advert-free for as little as $1 a month, feel free to click on the link to my Patreon account and sign up there for regular MP3 format stories. Thanks again for tuning in and for all the love as always, guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.